Nobody wanted the job. This is where it starts, because everything about what I did, and how I did it, and what it eventually cost me, begins with the fact that nobody wanted the job, and I was the one who got it anyway. Not because I was suited to it. Not because I had any particular skill or experience that made me the obvious choice. Because I was available, and I was not important enough to refuse, and the garrison needed someone to do it, and I was there. The garrison of Moria is not a place where you are given choices. You are given assignments. The assignment I was given, on a morning in my 3rd month beneath the mountain, was this. Feed the thing in the lake. Keep it fed. Keep it at the gate. Do not get too close. Do not let the feeding become irregular. Come back alive if possible. The captain who gave me the assignment didn't look at me when he gave it. He looked at a point somewhere above my head and recited the instructions in the specific tone of someone who has recited the same thing to the same assignment several times and has stopped expecting the recipients to last long enough to make the conversation worthwhile. When he finished, he dismissed me with a gesture and turned to something else before I had left the room. I learned later that I was the 4th orc to hold the position in 2 years. I held it for 31 years. I no longer hold it. I no longer go near the water. But for 31 years, the feeding of the thing in the Western Lake was my responsibility and my expertise, and the thing that made me, in the specific way that unpleasant, necessary jobs make the people who do them essential in a way that more respectable positions are not. Nobody thanked me for it. Nobody wanted to talk about it. But nobody wanted to do it themselves, and they needed it done, and I was the one who knew how. My name is Gruul. I have been in the garrison of Moria for 34 years, which makes me old by the standards of this place. Orcs do not retire. Orcs in garrisons die in the dark, or are sent to die somewhere less dark, or occasionally, very occasionally, survive long enough that the mountain becomes the only home they have ever known, and the question of leaving stops being a question anyone asks. I am in that last category. The mountain is what I know, and the dark, and the job. The thing in the lake is what I know best of all. I should tell you about the lake before I tell you about the creature, because the lake is the first thing you encounter, and the creature is the second, and the order matters. The western gate of Moria opens onto a narrow valley, and at the foot of the valley there is water. Not a pond, not a pool in any ordinary sense. Something larger than that, and darker than that, the specific quality of water that has been in one place for a very long time and has taken on the characteristics of that place. The water of Keled-Zaram in the upper reaches was clear and cold, and you could see the stars reflected in it, and the dwarves had thought it beautiful. The water of the Western Lake was none of those things. It was dark in the way of water that does not move and does not want to be looked into, that gives back no reflection and receives whatever falls into it without complaint and without evidence. The garrison used it for disposal. This is one of the things about the arrangement that the captains never discussed openly, but that everyone understood. A garrison of the size we maintained produces waste, the kind of waste that accumulates when a large number of creatures are living and fighting and dying in an enclosed space. Equipment that had worn out beyond repair, food that had gone wrong, orcs who had died of wounds or illness or punishment or each other, which was most of them. All of it went into the lake. In the early years of the arrangement, before I arrived and before the creature was fully established in its habits, this had apparently been a problem. Things thrown into the lake had a tendency to resurface. The water would return what was given to it. sometimes immediately, sometimes after a period that made the returning worse. The garrison had considered this a nuisance. The creature solved the problem. Whatever went into the lake now didn't come back. The arrangement was clean in a way that suited everyone except the orcs who had to do the delivering, which was me. The creature ate what we gave it, and in return, it stayed in the water, and it guarded the gate with a thoroughness that nothing we could have stationed there ourselves would have matched. Nobody came through the western gate without our knowledge. Several things that tried did not leave. The arrangement worked. The feeding was the entirety of the job. To understand what happened, you need to understand the full texture of what I was doing every day for 31 years. The other orcs did not speak to me much. This was not unusual in the garrison, where the social hierarchies were enforced through silence as much as through violence, where orcs of low rank were spoken to when there was a reason to speak to them and ignored otherwise. But the silence around me had a specific quality that I noticed early and that did not change in 31 years. It was not the silence of contempt, though there was contempt in it. It was the silence of something adjacent to contempt that is harder to name. The silence of orcs who needed me to do the thing I did and did not want to think about the thing I did, and therefore found it easier not to think about me. I was useful the way a necessary, unpleasant process is useful. The garrison produced waste, and the waste needed to go somewhere, and I was the mechanism by which it went there. They were glad the mechanism existed. They did not want to examine the mechanism. The ordinary feeding was awful. Whatever the garrison produced that was no longer useful. Kitchen waste, which was considerable given the number of mouths we fed, and the carelessness with which those mouths were fed. The carcasses of the wolves we kept for patrol when they died or when they became a problem. Equipment leather that had rotted past usefulness. The garrison also had a practice, which I will describe plainly, because plainness is all I have to offer, of not wasting the orcs who died. An orc who died of wounds or illness or any cause other than combat was rendered down in the lower kitchens, and the result contributed to the feeding pool. This was practical. The mountain does not produce food, and what we had, we used completely. I am telling you this, not to disturb you, but because the creature learned the difference. This is the first thing that should have told me what I was dealing with, early enough to adjust my understanding, before my understanding became dangerously incomplete. The creature could distinguish between the ordinary feeding and the days when something more substantial was available. On ordinary days it fed reliably, rising to the surface in the specific part of the lake that it had established as the delivery point, taking what was offered, submerging again. A transaction. Predictable. Manageable. On the days when an orc's remains were part of the feeding, it was different. More present. More active near the surface. The tentacles that it used to collect the feeding visible for longer than usual, moving with a quality I had no good word for then, and have only found a word for since. Interested. It was interested in the different way that things are interested, when the thing offered to them is more to their specific appetite than what they usually receive. I noted this. I filed it. I continued. The creature itself I will try to describe, though the description will be inadequate in the specific way that all descriptions of things seen partially and mostly in the dark are inadequate. I have never seen all of it at once. I do not believe it is possible to see all of it at once, that the part of it visible above, the surface at any given time, is a small fraction of what exists below, that the actual scale of it is something the lake contains but does not reveal. What I have seen is tentacles, many of them, of varying thickness, the largest ones wider across than my body, moving through the water with the specific boneless fluid motion of things that live in water and have never had any reason to move any other way. I have seen eyes, on the occasions when it has risen higher than usual, pale and large, and set in something that is not quite a head in any way I have a word for. I have seen its mouth once, at a distance, and I have not found it useful to think about the mouth since then. On one occasion in my 15th year, I saw it rise higher than usual, high enough that what I had understood to be its upper section was partially above the waterline, and I was close enough, and the morning was light enough that I saw more than I had seen before or have seen since. I will describe what I saw plainly, and I will not speculate about what it means, because the speculation goes to places I have decided not to follow. The part of it above the water had a surface that was not skin in any way I have a word for, not scaled, not smooth, something that absorbed the light rather than reflecting it, that was the specific dark of something that had developed in the complete absence of light and had no use for any property that related to light. The eyes, which I had seen before at greater distance, were larger than I had estimated from that distance, pale in the specific way of things that have lived without light for long enough that the eyes have become something different than what eyes are in the upper world. They were not looking at me with the directional specific focus of a predator targeting prey. They were simply present, open, receiving whatever information the environment provided without particular interest in any specific element of it, including me. This was the thing about the eyes that I have thought about most often in the years since. Not that they looked at me with hunger or attention or any of the things I would have found more comprehensible. That they looked at me with nothing. That I was present in their field and produced no particular response. That whatever I was to the creature, whatever category it placed me in, that category did not require any change in its current behavior. I preferred the days when it did not rise that high. What I know about it that does not come from direct observation comes from the lower tunnels. I was sent into the lower tunnels twice in 31 years, both times because the garrison needed someone to investigate structural concerns in the deep passages, and I was the one they sent when they needed someone who could be sent without too much loss if the sending went wrong. I went as far as I was required to go, and I did not go further, and what I saw at the extent of my going was this. The tunnels at that depth were wet. Not damp, not the ordinary moisture of stone deep underground. Wet in the specific way of passages that connect to water, that have water present not as seepage but as presence, that have something flowing through them that comes from somewhere you cannot see the origin of. The air at that depth had a quality I could not name then, and will try to name now. It was the air of a place that had never had anything living in it, that had been sealed from the surface, and from any light since before the mountain was the mountain, that had arrived at its own equilibrium across an unimaginable period of time, and that found the presence of a living, breathing creature in it, slightly wrong in the way that living, breathing creatures find certain places slightly wrong. I went as far as I needed to go, and I came back up. But I thought about what was down there. I had a lot of time to think, given the nature of the job, given the long hours of sitting at a careful distance from the lake, waiting to confirm that the feeding had been received, and the creature had submerged again, before I took the empty vessel back to the garrison. Thinking was most of the job. Watching and thinking and maintaining the specific alert stillness of someone in proximity to something that could kill them, attending to signals that might indicate a change in the creature's disposition. There were nights when I could hear it from the garrison gate. Not the creature itself, not any sound it made deliberately, but the water, the specific disturbance of a large body of water being moved through by something large, a sound that carried through the still night air of the valley and through the stone of the gate and into the passages beyond. The other orcs pretended not to hear it. Or perhaps they genuinely didn't hear it, having filed it under background sounds of the mountain in the way that garrison orcs file everything that does not require immediate response. I heard it every time. After 31 years, I still heard it every time. The theory I developed across years of thinking about it, and I had more time to think than most, given the solitary nature of the work, was this. The creature had not always been in the lake. It had come from somewhere below. The dwarves had dug deep, deeper than was advisable as it turned out, and in doing so, they had broken through into passages connecting downward to places no living thing had ever intended to reach. I had seen the evidence of this in the lower tunnels, the water rising through the floor at that depth, the flooded shafts descending into darkness that the torchlight could not reach the bottom of. Something had come up through those shafts. Something had followed the water upward through the broken stone, not by design, but by the simple logic of available space, and had emerged into the lake and found it sufficient. Not chosen. Not preferable to wherever it had been. Simply sufficient. The lake was dark and large and provided what it needed, and returning to the depths was apparently less attractive than staying. I found this more frightening than any alternative explanation. A creature placed there deliberately would have a purpose, and therefore limits. A creature that had simply drifted upward and settled because settling was easier than leaving had neither. Its behavior was entirely its own. The arrangement with the garrison was not something it had agreed to. It was a coincidence of location and appetite, and coincidences end. I knew this. The knowing of it was part of the job, the background awareness that the arrangement could end at any moment for reasons entirely within the creature and entirely outside my understanding or control. I carried this knowledge the way you carry a weight you have carried long enough that you have stopped noticing it. Not because the weight has become less, but because the noticing has become less. Because the mind accommodates what it cannot change by reducing its attention to it. This was the mistake that cost me. Not the carrying of the knowledge, the reduction of the noticing. In the early years, the rules were absolute. The rules I had developed across the first months of the assignment, partly from the minimal instructions the captain had given me, and partly from my own observation, and partly from what I could infer from the short accounts left by the two predecessors whose notes I had found in the keeper's store, were things I followed with the specific rigidity of someone who understands that the rules are the distance between alive and not alive, and that flexibility is another word for a shorter lifespan. Rule 1. Never approach the water's edge when the creature is active near the surface. Active meant visible, tentacles above the waterline, movement creating disturbance. Wait until the surface was still before approaching. Rule 2. Never allow the feeding to become irregular. I did not fully understand why this rule existed in the first years, and I understood it more completely later. The creature learned the rhythm. The rhythm was what kept it at the delivery point, rather than at some other point along the shore. Disrupting the rhythm disrupted the pattern, and disrupted patterns in creatures with appetites produced unpredictable relocations of that appetite. Rule 3. Do not look at it for longer than necessary. This was the rule I could never fully explain, and never stopped following. It came from somewhere below reasoning, from the part of the mind that has its own information and doesn't always share its sources. Looking at it for longer than the task required produced a quality of attention in return that I didn't want. I cannot be more specific than this. Rule 4. The safe distance is not fixed. What was safe yesterday is probably safe today, and certainly safe today, and definitely safe today. And then one day, it is not safe today. And if you have spent enough time telling yourself it is definitely safe, you will not be ready for the day it is not. I followed these rules for a long time, for most of the 31 years, with the specific rigor of someone for whom the rules are working, and who therefore has direct daily evidence that the rules are correct. I was still alive. My predecessors had not lasted 2 years between them, and I was still alive after 31, and the rules were why. The specific texture of the complacency arrived gradually, and I will try to be honest about how it arrived, because the honesty is the only useful thing I have left to offer about the job. It began with the distance. In the first years I had maintained a margin from the water's edge that felt excessive even then. More distance than observation suggested was necessary, a buffer built from the fear of someone new to the job and aware of how the previous keepers had ended. As the years accumulated, the margin reduced, not deliberately, the way that safety margins reduce when nothing has gone wrong for long enough, when the body learns that the feared event doesn't occur at the feared frequency and adjusts accordingly. I did not decide to stand closer. I noticed one day that I was standing closer and checked this against my model of the creature's reach and concluded that my model had improved and the earlier margin had been excessive. I moved the rule, then the observation. In the early years, I watched the surface of the lake throughout the delivery, my full attention on the water, reading its movement and stillness with the specific vigilance of someone for whom the reading was a survival skill. As the years passed, the watching became less complete, not absent. I still watched, but the watching became the watching of someone who had seen the same surface behave the same way hundreds of times and had stopped expecting variation. The watching of habit rather than vigilance. I moved the rule again. Then the rules became habits. This is not the same thing. Rules are attended to. Habits are performed. The difference is the presence of the mind during the performance, the active engagement with what is being done versus the automatic execution of something done so many times that the mind has deputed it to a lower level of processing and freed itself for other things. I had fed the creature so many times, had approached the water's edge so many times, had confirmed the feeding, and retreated so many times, that the performance of it had become something my body did while my mind was elsewhere. This is common. I know this is common. Every orc in the garrison who had survived long enough had developed the same quality of automatic performance in whatever their specific, dangerous routine was. It is what long survival in a dangerous place produces. The accommodation of the danger into the background, the filing of the thing that could kill you under things that have not killed you yet, and therefore probably will not kill you today. The complacency had also, I will admit this plainly, produced a specific pride. 31 years. Nobody else in the garrison had done this job for 31 years. Nobody else had the knowledge I had, the specific expertise of a keeper who had observed the creature across decades, who knew its habits, and its moods, and its preferences, and its specific tells in a way that nobody who had not spent that time could know. I was essential in a way that was unusual for someone of my rank. The captains needed me. Not personally, not with any warmth, but functionally. What I knew could not be easily replaced. I had also, in the last years, been approaching slightly closer to the water than the rules recommended. Not dramatically closer. A matter of degrees. Close enough to notice that I was doing it, not close enough to feel that I was being reckless. I told myself this was the natural result of better understanding, that 31 years of observation had given me a more accurate model of the creature's reach and behavior than the conservative rules of the early years had assumed. The rules were written by someone who did not know what I knew. I knew more now. The adjustment was appropriate. I told myself this many times. On the morning it happened, I was performing the ordinary feeding. A large quantity. One of the better days. The remains of 3 orcs from the previous week's internal disputes, along with the usual kitchen waste. The specific smell of it, something I had long since stopped noticing, the way you stop noticing the smell of the place you live. I was at the water's edge, slightly closer than the rule recommended, in the middle of the delivery. My attention distributed between the task and a dispute in the garrison that I had been thinking about since the previous evening. Something minor, an argument about ration allocation that had been developing into something less minor. The kind of internal garrison politics that occupied the mind in the absence of external threats. The surface of the lake was still. Rule 1 said, wait until the surface was still before approaching, and the surface was still, and I was approaching, and the rule was satisfied, and I was not attending to the rule because the rule was satisfied, and my attention was on the ration dispute, and the delivery was almost complete. The water moved without warning. Not the gradual disturbance of the creature rising from depth, the slow upwelling that I had learned to read as early signal, and that gave time to step back. The immediate surface eruption of something that had been at the edge of its reach, just below the surface, still and patient in a way that still and patient things near the surface are still and patient for reasons that are not the same, reasons as still and patient things at depth. It had been waiting at the surface. Not in the delivery area. To my left, past the edge of the delivery area, where I was standing because I had moved slightly closer than the rule recommended. I did not have time to think. I had time to move, partially, the beginning of the backward movement that 31 years of the rule had made instinctive even when the mind was elsewhere. The tentacle took my arm at the elbow as I was turning. It did not grip. It did not pull. It simply closed with the specific mechanical certainty of something that has no doubt about what it is doing, and what had been my arm below the elbow was no longer attached to the rest of me. The force of it knocked me sideways and backward simultaneously. I was on the ground before I understood I was falling. The pain arrived a moment after the taking, which is the specific mercy of injuries, large enough that the body delays the full reporting of them. What arrived first was heat, which made no sense given the temperature of the air and the water, but which is what I felt. Heat at the sight of it, and then spreading, and then the sound, which was my own voice, producing something I had no control over, and then the pain itself, complete and total and consuming every other available input. I fell away from the water. I kept moving backward, because backward was the only direction available, and the part of me that was still functioning had committed entirely to backward, without consulting the part that was trying to process what had just happened to my arm. I landed on the stone, and I didn't move. The creature didn't pursue me onto land. This was the specific thing that kept me alive, the one element of the situation that resolved in my favor, the creature's apparent disinclination to follow what it had partially taken onto dry ground. I have thought about why this is, and the best answer I have found is that the land was not its place, and it knew this, and the portion of me it had taken was sufficient for the moment, or was not worth the effort of the full pursuit. I do not know which. I prefer not to examine the question too closely. I lay on the stone at the edge of the western lake, with the cold air of the valley on my face, and I stared at the sky, which was the overcast grey sky of a cloudy morning, and was more sky than I had seen in years, given how rarely the job required me to look up, and I breathed, which was something I hadn't been certain I would continue doing, and I waited for the pain to arrive, which it did, and I managed the pain, which I did poorly, and eventually I made my way back to the garrison gate without losing any additional parts of myself. I told the captain the creature had attacked without provocation. This was not entirely a lie. It had not given the specific warning signals I had learned to read, and the surface had been still, which was what Rule 1 required. What I did not tell the captain was that I had been standing closer than the rules recommended, that the still surface had been still because something had been patient just below it, rather than because nothing was there, that the distinction between rule satisfied and rule understood was something I had stopped attending to years ago, and that this was the distinction that had cost me the arm. The captain assigned a replacement the same afternoon. I did not meet him. I hope he reads the notes I left in the keeper's store. I hope he reads them with more attention than I gave the notes left by the ones before me. I think about the creature still. Late in the night, when the garrison is quiet and the dark is complete and the mountain is doing whatever mountains do when nothing is moving through them. I think about it in the water, patient in the way that things with no experience of time are patient, neither waiting nor not waiting, but simply present in the place that is sufficient, receiving what is delivered, occasionally reaching for what is close enough to reach for. I think about the deep tunnels, the water coming up through the floor at that depth, the air with its quality of sealed ancient stillness. Whatever the creature came from, whatever was down there before it found the path upward, was older than the mountain, and older than the dark, and older than anything the garrison or the dwarves before them had put a name to. The creature that had followed the path upward and found the lake sufficient was not the deepest thing in the mountain. It was just the thing that had found its way out. I do not go near the water anymore. I eat my rations, and I perform my assigned tasks, and I keep my remaining arm close to my body in the specific unconscious way of something that has lost a part of itself and has not yet fully updated its model of what it is. The mountain is still my home. The dark is still what I know. The thing in the lake is still there, still fed, still at the gate, still receiving what the garrison provides, and staying where the garrison needs it to stay, for now, for as long as the coincidence of its appetite and the garrison's needs continues to coincide, for as long as the arrangement that was never an arrangement continues to function as if it were. I know what it is. I know where it came from. I know what it did when something it wanted was close enough to take. I know what it would have done if I had been one step closer. I do not go near the water anymore.